The Coach Sumrall era has officially begun at Tulane, and he is diving into the transfer portal right away, filling the holes that have been left behind by all the players that have departed. I'm David Rainey. This is another episode of Wave Watch, brought to you by thenode.com. Let's just go ahead and dive right into this. Now, the last time I talked to you guys, I was just kind of updating you on the players that Tulane had offered in the transfer portal, the positions they were going after in the transfer portal, and, maybe some guys that they might end up reaching out to in the transfer portal. Turns out, some of those guys are now part of the Tulane roster, but we'll get into that in a little while. Let's just kind of dive into this. I kind of mentioned this in the previous episode, but I'll mention it again. When Tulane came into this offseason, we'll say, I feel like there was 3 areas of need, or 3 areas that they needed to address because of the departures that they had. Number 1, obviously being the quarterback with Michael Pratt leaving for the draft, and you had to go get a big name there. Number 2 would be the DBs. You lose Jarius Monroe to the draft, Lance Robinson to the draft, safety Kentrell Webb leaves to go to Houston with Willie Fritz. And then the third one for me is wide receiver. You lose Chris Brazell to Tennessee, Jaquan Jackson, and Lawrence Keys to the draft. So that's 3 positions that I think have pretty glaring holes, and you have to fill them with multiple players. Now, they did lose talented players, of course, at other positions, 2 of them being linebacker Corey Platt is heading to Houston with Kentrell Webb and Willie Fritz, and D lineman Devin Deal is heading to TCU. So that's 2 talented young players that you're still going to have to replace, and we'll see how Tulane approaches that as well. We also had a couple guys that entered the transfer portal but are deciding to stick around and come back. That is quarterback Kai Horton, who has played a ton of games for Tulane, has filled in well when needed, so glad to have him back. And Cotton Bowl legend Alex Bowman is also returning. So good to have a veteran tight end come back, stick around so that they don't have to go out in the transfer portal and fill that role as well. But as I mentioned, the biggest areas of concern are QB, wide receiver, and DB. But these days, the transfer portal exists to fill the holes on your roster, and Tulane has done just that by getting a wave of commitments over the last couple of days. So let's dive into the people that they got. So as I mentioned, quarterback was a huge position of need with Michael Pratt leaving. It's the most important position on the roster, of course, so they had to go address it in a big way, and that they did. Tulane landed Oregon transfer Tai Thompson. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. He's 6'4", 220, a dual threat guy. He currently has an 88 overall grade on 247 if you're interested in that, or if that's something you put stock in. Now listen, he's coming from Oregon. He didn't play a ton at Oregon, so he is a bit of an unknown at the college level, but he was highly touted out of high school. He was a 4-star prospect with a 95 overall grade, and if he had committed to Tulane at that time, he would have been Tulane's highest rated prospect in history. So that tells you all you need to know about the type of player he was coming out of high school and the kind of difference he can make at Tulane if it pans out. Now, what's he going to bring to this offense that we didn't already have? You're probably saying, well, we had a athletic quarterback in Michael Pratt, which is true. Michael Pratt was a solid runner. He was certainly a dual threat, but he wasn't this kind of dual threat. Tai Thompson is going to bring a different type of running ability than Michael Pratt had, and that is not a knock on Michael Pratt at all. He's just a different style quarterback. So Tai Thompson is going to bring a different dynamic to an offense we haven't necessarily seen in the last few years. When you have a quarterback that's this dangerous with his legs, it's going to open up the run lanes in the RPO game for Mekhi Hughes and all the other running backs we have, but he's not just a running quarterback. He also has a huge arm, so that means that defenses can't just load up the box. They're going to have to stay honest, and that's going to provide even more running lanes for these running backs that we have. And we all know we have talented running backs, especially Mekhi Hughes, so he could be one of the biggest beneficiaries of this get for Tulane. Now, like I mentioned, he's still a work in progress. There's a reason he transferred, right? Like, if everything was going his way, he likely would still be at Oregon. He kind of got lost in the shuffle with Bo Nix coming over, and then Dylan Gabriel comes over this year in the offseason. So he enters the transfer portal, and he's going to try his luck at Tulane. Now, I have a ton of faith in Joe Craddock. He is known for building his offense around his players. And listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I have high hopes for Tai Thompson. I am buying into the hype, and I'm along for the ride. Let's transition to defensive back. This is where most of Tulane's commitments have come over the last couple of days. There's a lot of Troy defensive backs that came over, which was to be as expected, and we said that if you watched any of our other videos or followed us. First guy we got is not a Troy transfer. He is a Furman transfer. Now, I want to say to take this one with a grain of salt because it is said that he's transferred, but as of yesterday, he's posting that other schools have still offered. So this is fluid. This can change. But anyway, this is Michael Robinson. He's a Furman transfer, 6 foot, 184-pound cornerback. He's a 3-star prospect out of high school. We'll see if he sticks around. The next guy is a Troy transfer. He is Chris Rogers. He's a safety linebacker hybrid from Troy, 6'2", 216, from Corinth, Mississippi. He's also a freshman, so he's versatile and young. The next Troy transfer we have is Caleb Caleb Ranshaw, another safety from Troy, 6 foot, 197 pounds. He's a junior from Harvest, Alabama. So another guy they're adding to this safety room. The next guy is not a Troy transfer. He's a Kentucky transfer. He's coming over with his 6 year of eligibility. That is Jalen Geiger. He's going to add a veteran presence to this DB room that I think is needed when you lose guys like Jarius Monroe and Lance Robinson. And I'm sure he'll compete for playing time as well. The last defensive back I want to talk about is the final Troy transfer that we have, Jack Chinchu. He's somebody that we mentioned in our initial transfer portal video as a guy to watch out for that Tulane could reach out to just because he was from Troy, and I thought he could follow Coach Sumrall over here, which he ended up doing. He redshirted this year, so he's coming over with 4 years of eligibility. He's another safety. He's 5'10", 182 pounds. He's got an 86 overall grade on 247. He was highly touted out of high school. He was the 6A player of the year in his region. He played all 3 phases in high school. He played offense, defense, and he was a return guy. He had 2 defensive touchdowns and 700 yards and 5 touchdowns on offense. So clearly an athletic guy. So you're adding a super talented, athletic, young safety that should produce at Tulane for years to come. And he's one that I'm super excited about. Probably my most excited commitment so far outside of Tai Thompson. So that does it for the DBs. Let's transfer real quick in the wide receivers. Certainly a position of need. You know, they lose 3 guys. Arguably their 3 most productive guys this year. Now, don't get me wrong. I've been on the Yule Keith Brown hype train since the day he committed to Tulane. And he started to prove me right in the back half of the season. And I think you're going to see that roll in the next year. And it's going to be his room. So he's going to kind of be the leader of the pack, in my opinion, next year. But they still need to add a couple guys. You know, they went after a couple guys that they missed out on. Gage Larvadane was one. Jabre Barber was another one. Both of those guys committed elsewhere. But they are still pushing for some pretty big names. The most notable being former Alabama receiver Shaz Preston. He was a 4-star prospect out of high school. That would be a huge get for the Green Wave. So let's see if they can close on him. But let's talk about the one guy that they did get so far. UCF transfer Jaylen Griffin. He's a 6'3", 182 pound receiver out of Huntsville, Texas. He's not as big as Chris Brazell was, but he's big enough to fill that big body receiver role in this offense. I don't know if he'll be as productive as Chris was, but listen, if he can make plays, Joe Craddock's going to find a way to get him involved. Not saying he is Cortland Sutton, but he is a very similar build to Cortland Sutton, who Joe Craddock had at SMU. So he's got experience with receivers like this in his offense. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, I do think they would still like to get another wide receiver too, which is why you still see them pushing for guys like Shaz Preston and other names. As for the rest of the people they're going after, we don't know all the names, but we do know that Tulane hosted 11 prospects the other night for visits. So I'm certain we're going to see more commitments here soon. And listen, just in case you don't know, the transfer portal has closed for the time being, but there will be another spring window where players can enter. So if they don't get guys now, there is going to be another opportunity in the spring after they've had even more time to evaluate their roster. So if they go a couple months without any additions, don't worry. There will be another window where more guys will enter and they can fill any holes they need to fill. We've been keeping up with all of this on Twitter. I'd like to mention every time we do these, and I know Patty did as well, that this information is hard to come by. Being that Tulane is a smaller school, it doesn't get the coverage that some of these other schools get. So it's a little harder to come by information, but we are not the only account out here posting information. There's a ton of good accounts. Just go to our Twitter at whoeffing knows. We retweet all the accounts that we follow and get information from. So make sure you follow them as well as us to stay up to date. We've also been doing a transfer portal tracker article on thenode.com, which I'll link below in the description. It has all the players that Tulane has offered, a little quick bio on each of them, whether they've committed elsewhere, whether they visited to Tulane, whether they've committed to Tulane. So if you want all that information just in one spot, it's right there for you at thenode.com. So yeah, follow us on Twitter at whoeffing knows, at @beingtheknow. Subscribe to @beingtheknow on YouTube. Subscribe to @whoeffing knows on YouTube. That's just Patty and I's podcast where, you know, you can get to know us a little bit. And it's not a Tulane pod, but we do tend to talk Tulane a lot. So if you want to get to know us and hear some more Tulane opinions from us, follow us over there at whoeffing knows on YouTube. It's at whoeffing knows everywhere. It's also at @beingtheknow everywhere on all social media. So just follow us. And with that said, I'm David Rainey with thenode.com. This was another episode of Wave Watch. See y'all next time, and roll wave.